On a scale of 1 to 10, what priority level is given to climate action in your city?
In many cities, climate action is not a priority. Sectors such as health, education, mobility, economic development and infrastructure take up most of the attention of both mayors and citizens.
However, climate action is directly related to each of these sectors. There is a strong link between climate action and reducing inequality. But how can cities address them together?
To respond to this question, we are speaking to Christina Campbell, Technical Assistant Manager for C40 Cities Inclusive Climate Action Team. Christy, welcome to the course. Our first question is, what exactly does inclusive and equitable climate action mean?
Hi, Viola. Thank you so much for having me in this course. Thank you for the invitation. I think first and foremost, we need to stress that climate change can't be tackled without tackling inequality and vice versa. And climate actions bring a whole host of social, economic and environmental benefits simultaneously. For example, improved air quality, low-cost renewable energy and employment opportunities. But these benefits need to be accessed by all, need to be accessible by all. And when this happens, climate policies will be much more impactful. So inclusive and equitable climate action is really about a unique opportunity for cities to follow a low-carbon and climate-resilient development path that can also create an inclusive and equitable urban society for all.
But why should cities address climate and inclusivity together? Aren't they very different subjects?
That's a great question, Viola, and I think it can seem quite different on the surface. But when you look at it in a bit more detail, they are very closely connected, and mainly because climate change is inherently and deeply unfair, and it impacts some communities disproportionately. And for example, if you think about how without having inclusive and equitable development strategies, up to 130 million people could be forced into poverty by 2030, and climate change could displace hundreds of millions of people by the middle of the century. So some communities are much more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, in particular those in the lowest income bracket or migrants, those with disabilities, youth, elderly, women, just to name a few, who may have limited coping capacities due to pre-existing social and economic barriers. And when you acknowledge and respond to these pre-existing barriers that feed the social inequities, when you do this as a city, then you will be in a much better position to make sure that your climate actions actually respond to residents' needs.
And following up from that, can you give me an example? What does it mean for climate change to be unfair?
Yes, sure. For example, if you look at informal communities in many global south cities, for example in Salvador, some communities have no access to waste collection, and they end up having to throw their waste on the hillside, which then means that they don't only lack essential services, but when climate change induced flooding hits those communities, that waste enters the drainage system, and so it's all really interconnected, and addressing one will also help address the other.
As usual in society, when things go wrong, it's always the poorest of the poor that suffer. So climate change is a reality that whatever you do, how you design, what projects you want to do, you have to include climate change as a factor.
Have seen the projections, we understand what it means for a city like this. We have to keep building our plan farther out and farther out and farther out, because we literally have to protect our people. We have to protect our way of life. It's really essential stuff.
We don't have to choose between social goals or quality of life goals or environment goals. They are the same.
Si nous n'incluons pas la totalité de la population, nous n'arriverons pas à résoudre le défi climatique.
How can a city deliver inclusive and equitable climate action?
Yeah, so to do so, cities must ensure that the principles of equity and inclusion are embedded throughout all of their city processes, policies, and impacts. So firstly, when we look at processes, the way that cities can make them inclusive is by making sure that they are deeply rooted in engagement with and the involvement of a wide and diverse set of stakeholders, and particularly those who are most impacted by both climate change and inequality, and those who have been excluded from the policy dialogue and decision-making processes. When we look at the second element, which is policies, cities need to make sure that policies are actively designed with people and people's needs, justice and fairness at the center of all decision making to make sure that they are responding to people's needs. And then when it comes to the third component, which is impacts, the cities need to make sure that the impacts of policy making are equitably distributed across the population, because it's not enough to make sure that there are lots of benefits of climate actions if not everyone can access those. But in order to make sure that this is happening, cities need to put in place a robust measuring, monitoring and evaluation system.
What practical tips would you give to a city official on inclusive climate action?
I would say first and foremost, always put people at the heart of climate action. So I would encourage all cities to make sure that any policies they are designing are co-created in whatever way is possible, also taking into consideration capacity. But that they are basing the policies that they design and deliver on the needs of people, and especially on local knowledge and the lived experiences of those who are on the front lines of climate change. Secondly, I would say it's really important to use and to apply an equity lens. And what I mean by an equity lens is identifying the most at-risk communities and then looking in detail at how climate change impacts those communities and what are their challenges, concerns and needs, so that the cities can respond to those. And then lastly, I would say that it's really important for cities to conduct a diagnosis of their city needs. So when they think about the different city domains like education, health, economic development, civic participation, and of course the environment, among others, they need to look at how the city is performing in all of these areas, where they're performing well, where not so well, because this will help urban policymakers and key stakeholders to design policies that really support the most vulnerable communities.
Thank you again, Christy, for your time and for sharing your knowledge and these insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viola. This was a really great opportunity. Thank you for the invitation, and best of luck with the rest of the course.
Now that you learned a bit about what inclusive and equitable climate action is all about, the next unit will show you some inspiring examples from cities of Bogota in Colombia and Cape Town in South Africa.